Hi everyone, my name is Fajardo-Anstine, and this is my Analytical Proposal Report. According to lead food researcher and conservationist Gary Naban, in the last 100 years, more than 1,000 varieties of uniquely American seeds, breads, fruits and fish, greens and game have declined and are currently at risk of extinction. This alarming statistic underscores the negative impacts of climate change on our food systems in the United States. Over 76 varieties and beloved American staple foods such as the Atlantic salmon and the sugar maple are facing the same fate. As a professional who works in the environmental sector, I'm familiar with receiving statistics from a third-degree source, seemingly ringing the caution bell from a distance on how climate change permeates every nook of our world. However, I've lived it. For example, the chokecherry is a staple food for many indigenous people of northern New Mexico and southern Colorado. A certain unspoken pride for my family is attached to an indigenous tradition of collecting chokecherries at the end of the summer. Since my grandmother's passing, the women in my family every season have kept this alive and have gone to pick the native crop. I've tried to keep this tradition going, but every season there are less and less cherries growing. And after 30 years, this past season, there were none. This personal experience implicates a larger narrative in my mind of native crop extinction and climate change. And because of this, I want to focus my JTC 301 analytical report on this issue. I will explore the advantages and disadvantages of preserving and investing in American indigenous crops. My research question is, how does preserving indigenous crops impact the American food system and mitigate the impacts of climate change? First, I would like to explain why I would like to pursue this topic. My career in water is opening up new realms of interest for me, and I would like to explore food systems as a possible area of focus for a career transition and working with indigenous food preservation. This report will allow me to evaluate areas within the American food system that have a gap in research, such as agricultural production, environmental factors, and social productions of crops. And I believe there is a gap in southwestern indigenous crops that leads to a lack of funding and programs, both in promoting preservation and investment in indigenous crops. Secondly, this project will help me better understand the advantages of preserving and investing in the production of indigenous American crops. For example, according to the Indigenous Agricultural Journal, there are many advantages of preserving them. A prevalent one is climate resiliency. These crops are already adapted to the climate and they use less water, which means less demand on an already dwindling water supply. Since I want a holistic view of preserving indigenous crops, I also want to explore the challenges. According to the United Nations, genetically modified seeds are throwing farmers out of production. And the rise of GMOs indicates a decrease in heritage seed variables and availability. I plan to read more on the rise of GMOs and how that interacts with the consumption of indigenous crops in the United States. For example, do genetically modified foods, are they easier to produce? Does this indicate a decrease in demand for heritage foods? This will provide more answers on the trend of consumption. My report requires conducting 2 semi-structured interviews and catering my writing to a specific audience and using secondary sources such as literature. My interviewees are 2 people, which consist of Andrea and Dr. Michael Kotutwa Johnson, who is a Hopi dry farmer living in the high arid desert of Arizona. We have both a working relationship. Additionally, I am writing this report for a precise audience, which is an environmental professionals and native food system advocates in the United States. So as I have laid out, I have a thorough report strategy and audience. This analytical report will allow me to explore more in depth the nuances of indigenous crop preservation in the United States. Ultimately, the assignment will help me in my career as I consider other water and climate intersections. Additionally, this will help me answer my research question: how does preserving indigenous crops impact the American food system and mitigate the impacts of climate change? And I will leave you with this last thing. Just like the choke cherries I picked with my grandmother, we should understand the cultural context of indigenous foods and the importance of preserving them as a means to mitigate climate change. Not only does it honor the rich national heritage and the tradition of indigenous people, but it utilizes resilient crops that are already adapted to the region. By safeguarding and investing in native crops, we promote sustainable sources of nutrition and the rich heritage of Native people that is integral to this country. Thank you so much for your time. Here are my sources, and I look forward to your feedback. Thank you, everyone.